Hello OT learners and welcome to today's video where we'll be talking about general laboratory safety rules. So without further ado, let's begin. So we'll start off this video tutorial by looking at the introduction and overview, and then we'll proceed to look at the laboratory safety rules, the do's and the don'ts in the laboratory, and then we'll look at the conclusion to end this video. So introduction and overview. In this video, we cover a standard set of fundamental safety guidelines for laboratories, all of which must be adhered to when working with potentially dangerous substances or procedures. To prevent lab mishaps, follow these fundamental guidelines of conduct, cleanliness, and safety. For some equipment, procedures, and materials, laboratory-specific safety regulations may be necessary. These regulations should be covered by SOPs for a particular laboratory. So let's look at the laboratory safety rules that we'll be talking about in this video. So the basic safety rules for laboratory conduct should be observed whenever working in a laboratory. Below are the most common safety rules for laboratories. So the first one I want to look at is for you to know the locations of the laboratory safety showers, eye wash stations, and fire extinguishers. The safety equipment may be located in the hallway near the laboratory entrance. So make sure to know where the location of the safety showers is in case there's a spillage on you and you need to quickly go and rinse yourself. You go and use the safety shower. Or if there is a splash on your face and you need to wash your eyes, you need to know where the eye wash station is so that you immediately go there once there is any accident. And then the next important thing you need to know is where the fire extinguishers are. You need to know where the fire extinguishers are located in your laboratory or near your laboratory. So in case of any fire, whether small or big, you go to the nearest fire extinguisher near you and pick it up to quench the fire. So the next one I want to look at is for you to know the emergency exit routes. Now, it is very important that you know all the emergency exit routes in your laboratory. So in case of an emergency or there's a fire outbreak, you need to know where the emergency routes are for you to get to a secured location. So the signs you can see over here are some of the usual emergency exit signs that you see pasted on route or entrances that are used as the emergency exit routes. So the next one I want to look at is for you to avoid skin and eye contact with all chemicals. So you need to avoid skin and eye contact with all chemicals. You do this by wearing your lab coat. Make sure you wear a long sleeve lab coat that covers your arm and everything. And then you wear eye protection, wear safety goggles, wear eye protections at all times when you are carrying out experiments in the laboratory. And make sure to wear hand gloves to avoid the spillage of chemicals onto your hand that may cause potential harm to your skin. So you avoid skin and eye contact by either wearing lab coat, eye protection, and then hand gloves for your personal safety. You also need to minimize all chemical exposure. So when you're in the laboratory, you need to minimize chemical exposures by using a nose protection or covering, or when you're carrying out an experiment that is accompanied with the effervescence or the emission of gases, you need to carry out these reactions in the fume chamber so that these gases are not directly exposed to you. They are channeled outside and you are safe whilst working in the laboratory. You have to assume that all the chemicals of unknown toxicity are highly toxic. So don't assume that any chemical you see colorless in a beaker is water in the laboratory. Assume that they are highly toxic and you don't play with them. In that way, you are safe, and then there's no way you're going to use any chemical that you don't know the toxicity to play with. So don't assume anything is less toxic. Assume that every chemical in the laboratory is highly toxic and then proceed with caution. You also need to post warning signs when unusual hazardous materials or hazardous equipment or other special conditions are present. So when you're carrying out experiments and some of these hazardous chemicals or equipment are being used, you need to make sure you post warning signs to people so that if your experiment is in progress, write work in progress, do not touch, so that no one will come and try to pack your experiment while your setup is there. So you post warning signs to caution people not to come close to your setup when you are not around. So post warning signs to alert people or to inform people not to be prone to any hazardous chemicals or substances around you. You have to also avoid distracting or startling persons working in the laboratory. This is very, very important. So if you startle someone or someone is working, and then you shout the person's name out of fear, okay, because you just suddenly shout the person's name, the person may get startled, and then that will create an unsafe act, which create an unsafe conditions and may result in an accident in the lab. Potential accident that can happen is chemical spillage. So someone is having a beaker with some, let's say, an acid in it. You shout the person's name, then the person got startled and leave the beaker with the acid, and it's the beaker fell down and broke, and the acid splashed on the person. That is very, very bad. So you need to avoid shouting people's name or distracting or startling people when they are working in the laboratory. This is very, very important. So the next one we want to look at is the use of equipment for its designated purpose. So use beaker for the usage of beaker, use burette for what burette is supposed to use for, use test tubes for what test tubes are supposed to use for. Don't go and use your burette to be stirring solutions. Your burette is not meant to be stirring solutions. Don't use your pipette to be stirring solutions. Don't use your mouth to be sucking or doing suction when you are carrying out an experiment. It is not good for you. So use equipment for their designated purposes. That is very, very important. So combine reagents in their appropriate order, such as adding acid to water. You don't want to add water to acid. The reverse will generate a reaction that produces tons of it, and that can cause an explosion. So make sure you read your laboratory manual. You know what you're expected to do, and follow the procedures that are in the manual. Don't go and use your way. Use the procedures that your supervisor has provided for you. So you have to avoid adding solids to hot liquids. Like I said, adding any solid to any hot liquid all of a sudden can produce reactions that emit a lot of heat, and this heat can cause an explosion in the laboratory. So you need to avoid adding solid to hot liquids in the laboratory. All laboratory personnel should place emphasis on safety and chemical hygiene at all times. So your safety is very, very important. You don't want to carry out one experiment and have thousands of accidents and then thousands of people getting injured in the laboratory. So your safety is very, very important, and then emphasis needs to be placed on that. Now, never leave containers of chemicals open. Never do that when you're in the laboratory. So once you are done taking an aliquot of the substance that you've prepared, or the acid or the base or any chemical that you're using in the laboratory, make sure you close it back. Don't leave it open, because these chemicals emit gases. The gases are always coming on. They're producing gases. They may react with another gas that is also around, and it may be toxic to you. So make sure that once you are done taking an aliquot of your sample, make sure you close all the containers and don't leave them open to emit the gases that they contain. Now, all containers must have appropriate labels. And unlabeled chemicals should never be used in the lab. You don't know what is in an unlabeled container, so don't use it. Ask your supervisors to give you those with labeled containers, those you are sure that the chemicals or the reagent that you need for experiments are the ones present in those bottles. Don't use those that are unlabeled. Those that are unlabeled may contain other reagents that may not be suitable for that condition or that experiment you are carrying out at the moment. So always make sure that you ask your supervisors to give you containers that are clearly labeled with the substances or the chemicals that are present in them for your personal safety. Now, do not taste or intentionally sniff any chemical. We also said previously that assume all chemicals in the laboratory are highly toxic. So there's no way you should try to taste or sniff any chemicals. It's not good for you. Okay, there's a lot of potential hazards that can be accompanied with you sniffing or tasting any chemical in the laboratory. So try to avoid doing that. Never consume and or store food or beverages or apply cosmetics in areas where hazardous chemicals are being used. This is very self-explanatory. So don't eat in the lab. It's just that simple. Don't eat in the lab, because the chemicals that are around you makes the air around you not safe for you. So eating in those conditions may be bad for you. And then you may accidentally be eating near where you are carrying an experiment, and there may be a spillage, and your bread or whatever you are eating may suck some of the acid or some of the substance that spilled, imbibition. So you need to avoid those so that you do not consume any chemical by accident. So don't consume or drink anything whilst you are in the laboratory. Now, do not use your mouth suction for pipetting or starting a siphon. Now, mostly a lot of people do this when you are in the laboratory, less endowed laboratories that do not have all the necessary equipment. You normally use your mouth to do the suction or pipetting when you are carrying out some experiment. This is really, really bad. This is a very bad habit. So let's try to avoid using our mouth to do suctions when you are in the laboratory. Now, wash exposed areas of the skin prior to leaving the laboratory. So once you're done with your experiment, you are done doing everything. Don't assume that during the experimental process, there was no acid that spilled on your hand, there was no chemical that touched your skin, so you don't want to wash your hand. Make sure you wash your hand as a safety precautions and as a measure to avoid indirectly ingesting any chemical when you are about to eat. So always wash your hand under running water with soap to have your hands clean and safe before you leave the laboratory. Now, determine the potential hazards and appropriate safety precautions before beginning the experiment. This simply means read your experimental manuals. So if you read your experimental manuals, you know the safety precautions you need to take during the experimental process. You know the hazards that are associated with the experiment, and you prepare towards them diligently. So always make sure you read your instruction manual so you know the potential hazards that may occur and then the safety precautions to take to avoid them from happening. Now, procedures should be developed that minimize the formation and dispersion of aerosols or gases. So this is normally going to be done by your instructor or your lab analyst who is in charge of your experiment. So he's going to make sure that the procedures that they come about are those that minimizes the formation and dispersion of aerosols for you. But in case you are supposed to come up with your own experimental process, make sure you do a thorough research. Send the methods or the methodology to your supervisor to scrutinize for you to make sure it is safe enough for you to carry out in the particular laboratory you find yourself. So always make sure that the procedures that you are using to form the product that you want to form or synthesize, they always minimize the formation and the dispersion of aerosol for your personal safety and the safety of others around you in the laboratory. If an unknown chemical is produced in the laboratory, they must and should be considered as hazardous. So don't assume any material that you produce in the lab is going to be less hazardous or is neutral, and then you want to maybe taste it or something like that. Don't do that. So assume all the products that you form in the laboratory are hazardous and they can cause harm to you. So you don't go by trying to sniff it, trying to ingest it, or try to lick it or anything like that. Assume that they are dangerous for you and then treat them as such. So although there may be variations to the safety precautions that were discussed in this video, overall these safety precautions are to be used, or they are the general precautions that are applicable in all laboratories. You can see them in high standard laboratories or even low standard laboratories or even laboratories in your school, then pharmaceutical laboratories, food laboratories, and beverage laboratories. These are some common safety precautions that they take for their personal safety, the safety of the product, and then the safety of the environment and everyone around them as well. So thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the Online Tutor platform, make sure you consider subscribing and turning on that notification so that you don't miss any of our latest tutorials on the Online Tutor platform. So thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.